Hi everyone, welcome back to Reissued. If you're new here, my name is Andrew. Today I'm coming at you with a reissued thrifting guide to Chicago. I've been in Chicago for almost 2 months now. There's not a lot of normal projects that I could do here. You know, usually I'd be working around my house, doing a lot of drawing, painting. I am here working at Lyric Opera of Chicago, so I haven't had a lot of opportunity to do creative projects like that. But you know that I had to check out a lot of thrift stores, not because I can really take much back with me, but because I have a burning desire to know what is the thrift scene like in Chicago. I went to a bunch of places. I'm coming at you with my first impressions of these places, and I'm going to be rating them so we end up with sort of a numbered list of what I think are my best or worst thrift stores in Chicago. If you see me looking down at any point in this video, I do have a detailed list of notes in front of me that I will be referencing throughout the video. This one feels almost a little bit like an academic presentation. I have gone out into the field, I have traveled in wind and rain and snow all over Chicago to check out what the thrifting scene is like here, and I've taken my notes and I'm now presenting my research to you. Shout out to Magic Mind for that extra little boost of energy that's gonna get me through this video. Magic Mind has been great for me in boosting my productivity and keeping my brain, which tends to be kind of all over the place, a little bit more on track, so let's see how that checks out today. If you wanna check out Magic Mind and boost your creative flow, I'm gonna leave a link in the description box down below this video. I can't wait to get started and share with you my favorite thrift stores here in Chicago. Let's jump on in. So as we get started here, I need to lay out the rules and get started with a few disclaimers so that we're all starting on the same page. First of all, we know that thrifting is subjective. What I consider to be a good find, what I consider to be a fair price point, what I'm looking for personally may be very different to what other people are looking for, so this is just my perspective on these places. And secondly, I don't live in Chicago. I'm visiting all of these thrift stores for the very first time, so my impression of the stores may not be the same as someone that lives in Chicago and has visited these stores multiple times. So if you live in Chicago and have a different perspective on any of these thrift stores, be sure to leave that down in the comments below. Share your knowledge with the group. Also, if there's anywhere that I didn't hit that I should have hit, be sure to leave that down in the comments as well. In my journey this time, I ended up hitting 10 different stores, but like 8 different brands, if you will. Some were different locations of the same brand. And since there are so many amazing thrift stores and resale stores and antique stores here in Chicago, I had to put some limitations on the number of stores that I was going to go to. So here are my limitations for how I chose the stores that I was going to cover here in this video. First of all, I'm keeping it mostly within the Chicago metro area, starting from the Loop and kind of extending upward and outward toward like Andersonville. I made a post in the community tab on my channel asking for recommendations for thrift stores, and there were several people that recommended stores that were sort of outside the Chicago metro area. I bet those are really great stores because I do tend to find that thrift stores that are kind of outside of a metropolitan area tend to have more unique finds or to be less picked over. However, since I'm staying pretty centrally in Chicago, I wanted to keep it a little bit more in that area. Secondly, I decided to only go to stores that are deemed thrift stores and not antique stores or resale stores. I draw that distinction of a thrift store as places that are taking in donations and selling them on behalf of some sort of mission, as opposed to an antique store which is curating a collection of finds that feel a little bit more cohesive and the store feels a little bit more put together. I think of thrift stores as being a little bit more random and at a lower price point in general. Also, when I was on the fence about whether or not something was an antique store or a thrift store, I looked at how Google Maps classified that. And finally, for my list, I'm focusing mostly on furniture and home decor. Here on my channel, we're all about using repurposed materials. At the very beginning of my channel, I focused a lot more on clothing and wearable pieces, and as it's progressed, I'm focusing more on artwork and home renovation and home decor in general. And so I felt that even though I still really hold an interest in thrifting for clothing, and actually that's most of what I bought while I'm here because I can't really take much more back with me, I felt it was best to focus on the furniture and home decor angle just because that's a little bit more universal, and that feels a little bit more applicable to my channel right now. I will elaborate a bit more on my reasons for not covering clothing and discuss some good clothing thrifting options later on in the video, so if you're interested in that, I'll be sure to put a little timestamp down below so you can skip to that part of the video. It's not always in my nature to rate things, especially thrift stores, because the quality of a store really ultimately depends on what you're looking for, what they have on the day. So if I rate a store really low, that doesn't mean you're not going to find something amazing there. However, for the sake of this video and covering so many different stores, I thought it might be easier and more YouTube friendly to assign these some numbered ratings to kind of keep us on track and give us kind of a scale to go off of. I can't promise that every rating is going to be super fair, but looking at the tallied list at the end of what were my favorite stores versus my least favorite stores, I'd say that the rating system really held up for that. So I'm rating based on 5 categories. Number 1, atmosphere and organization. What does it feel like to be in the store? Is it easy to get around? Can I see things well? Is it well lit? Does the store have a nice vibe that feels homey or comfortable or creative? Atmosphere and organization can really make the difference between finding something amazing and leaving something really cool behind. Number 2 is going to be quality of finds. How unique are the items? Do I feel like they're on track with what people are looking for now, or do they feel super dated? Are they really interesting and one-of-a-kind antique finds? Quality of finds is going to concern how special each item is itself. Number 3 is projected turnover rate. Now, I debated not putting this one on the numbered list because I can't really know this for sure. I can only get an impression based on my knowledge of thrift stores and of working in a thrift store myself. I'm gonna be looking for how crowded the store is. Are there sold tags on items? Do I see employees bringing new items out to the floor constantly? The only way to judge turnover rate for sure would be to go back to the same store repeatedly, which I didn't have time to do in my trip this time. But if you have been to these stores multiple times, be sure to weigh in on the turnover rate for me and help me out with that. Turnover rate is important because even if you go into a store and they have really amazing things, if you go back the next month and they have all the same things, that's not going to be a store that you want to go back and keep revisiting to find new things. Number 4 is what I'm calling the hit rate. Number 2 is about quality of items and are there good items in the store, but number 4, hit rate, is going to be about how many good items are there in the store. Maybe there's one really amazing item, so that would maybe be good for quality of finds, but if there's only the one and everything else in the store is crap, that's not really going to be a very high hit rate. It's not very likely that you'll find something in the store. So hit rate is all about how likely it is that I think that someone will find something amazing in that store. And number 5, price point and discounts. This is a hotly contested thing in thrift stores these days because prices tend to be edging up. So I'm not just gonna be looking at whether everything is cheap, but I'm gonna be looking at whether I feel the pricing is appropriate based on the item. Again, I work at a restore and I understand some of the psychology behind pricing, so I'm gonna be looking for whether the condition of the item, the uniqueness of the item, the retail value of the item is reflected in the price. And finally, I'm not gonna include this in the numbered rating system, but I will tell you for each store, would I return to the store and what would I go looking for there? Just because a store has a low rating doesn't mean I wouldn't go back there again depending on what I'm looking for, so I wanted to include that as well. All right, with all that out of the way, let's jump on into our first store, which is the REISSUED here in Chicago. There is only one location. This was the furthest out store that I went to in the North Park area, so it was driving distance from where I was. I might not have chosen to go this far out, but it is the REISSUED. I had to go, I had to check it out and see what it was all about. And I was not disappointed. The store was large, it was organized, it had a lot of good finds. There was this concrete geometric coffee table that was amazing. There was this antique chair set for I think $25 that was looking pretty rough but would be amazing with like a really graphic paint job. There were tons of large kitchen cabinet sets that were in pretty good shape. Some really unique textured tiles, modern bathroom vanities and sinks. So many stylish and affordable lighting pieces. I was considering getting some of these, but again, our car space on the way home was tricky, but definitely good lighting. And finally, there were some really inexpensive little like cabinet handles. It's unusual to see something really sleek and modern like this at a thrift store price. I think these were like $2 or $3 a piece. Great price for these. Definitely would pick these up if that was what I was looking for right now. So let's get to our ratings here. Atmosphere and organization, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5. I thought it had a really great vibe and layout. The store sort of has multiple different rooms. It has sort of a warehouse feel in some areas and more of a retail store feel in other areas. I really like that mix. It made it feel like you were sort of hunting for everything, which I really enjoy, but it was also well lit, well laid out. It was easy to get around. And even though there were a lot of customers in the store, I didn't tend to feel super crowded. Quality of pieces, I'm giving this a 5 out of 5 as well. There were multiple pieces throughout the store that felt really unique, really special, something that you're not going to see in every store. There were definitely high-end modern pieces, older antique pieces, just a really nice mix of things. Projected turnover rate, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5 as well. We got there early on a Saturday morning just before they opened, and there was already a line of customers out the door. When the doors opened, there were people running into the store to grab specific items. As we shopped around the store for like an hour, there were multiple sold tags going on items around us. This is a store that I feel like if we went back the following week, we would definitely see a lot of new items on the floor. With number 4, the hit rate, I'm giving this a 5 out of 5 as well. Not only was the quality of finds good, but there were a lot of them. I can think of multiple items that if I was looking for those things for my house or if I had the car space for them, I definitely would have picked them up. And then for number 5, pricing, I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5. This store was a bit high on some prices, but in comparison to what I'm seeing in other thrift stores these days, a lot of it really tracked. I'm docking at a point because there were certain items that were overinflated that didn't really hit the mark. They do have a color discount system here. That's something I'm gonna be mentioning for several of these places. I like a color discount system because it means that the longer something stays in the store, the more it gets discounted, which both helps the turnover rate so those things don't hang around the store forever, but also is a way of correcting overinflated pricing. If no one's gonna pay $100 for it, maybe someone will pay $75 the next week, maybe someone will pay $50 the next week. It's gradually correcting that price until it reaches a good price for the customer. So final impressions here, I would absolutely come back to the store. I'd come looking for modern, trendy furniture pieces, definitely the possibility of some antiques, definitely some great lighting, and of course, if I were doing a renovation and needed bathroom vanities, kitchen cabinets, cabinet handles, there are a lot of options here that even though they may be still pricey, they'll still be less than you would pay in a retail space, and you could end up with some really unique finds. Moving on. Next is the Salvation Army, which is more centrally located in the Sheffield Neighbors area. This store is a huge new construction, like superstore kind of vibe, really big square warehouse kind of feel, really well lit. It looks like kind of what I would expect to see a modern Goodwill, Value Village, mega thrift look like. It's easy to navigate, really organized. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5 for atmosphere, and maybe that's unfair because it was really put together as a whole, but I tend to prefer a thrifting experience that feels a little bit less sterile and a little bit less clinical. This just felt very corporate, like a Walmart. I can't really knock it, but it didn't make me feel my most creative, which is how I tend to like to feel at a thrift store. I'll go ahead and say that that same thing can be said about a number of thrift stores that I go to all the time that I love, so I'm just being really picky here. For quality of finds, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5 as well. I'm not sure that it had a lot of really unique pieces, but there were a couple of pieces that stood out as being in great condition, definitely something that's kind of hip or trendy that people would be looking for now. There were some interesting pieces of original art, some modern looking lamps, this brown leather rolling office chair. Again, not all of these items are super unique or super special, but they are something that we're seeing a lot in retail stores lately. So if you're looking for that kind of style, it would be a good opportunity to get those things at a discount. On projected turnover rate, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5 as well. This store was super busy. There were constantly employees bringing new items out to the floor even as I was shopping there. There were sold tags on multiple furniture items. Again, the store seemed super organized, so they were well positioned to get things on and off the floor quickly. So I would expect the turnover rate at this store would be very high. In terms of hit rate, I'm giving this store a 4 out of 5. This is a very large store and there were a lot of good items to choose from. Not quite as many as the REISSUED, but I think the combination of the high turnover rate and the large store means that if I would go in here weekly, I would likely see new things all the time. For pricing, I'm gonna give this one a 3 out of 5. I felt across the board that their pricing was pretty high, and on certain modern furniture items, this cowhide lounge thing, this modern squishy sofa, these items were priced over $1,000. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's too high. The items were, to my eyes, in really great condition. They were really modern. It's likely that the retail price on these items would be quite high, but when thrift store employees choose to price something this high, I like to see a little printout of what the item looks like online, what the retailer is, what the retail price is, to help give us perspective on this. Just seeing a tag that says $1,000 on it is very different than seeing a photo of the product on the website listed for $4,000. It changes the psychology of how you think about the item, and it gives context to why this item is so expensive. I could have looked that up on my own, so that's on me, but I think that anytime I'm spending more than like $300 on an item at a thrift store, I like the employees to do that for me. I definitely would return to this store to scope out like high-end modern furniture items at a discount. I felt like a lot of their items were in great condition, so if I was considering buying some new furniture somewhere, I would come here first to see what I could find. I was intrigued by the artwork they had here, and they were pulling out new things all the time, and this store also had some good clothing options. Decent brands at a reasonable price, it was well organized. Again, I'm not really covering clothing across the board here. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the video, but of all the places I went to, this is somewhere that I would come back to for clothing. Next store that we're covering is called Rebuilding Exchange. This store was not on my radar at all. I was walking to the Salvation Army and I just happened across it. Of course, I had to go inside to check it out. This store is very different to the other stores, so I debated including it in this rating system at all. However, I just had to talk about it and I thought I would go ahead and include it as well. The Rebuilding Exchange focuses mostly on architectural salvage and building materials. They do have some furniture and accessories, but it's really a minimal part of their space. But if you were renovating or doing a thrift flip project and you were looking for old doors, doors, knobs, windows, light fixtures. This is a super cool place that has some interesting finds. So starting with atmosphere here, this one is a 5 out of 5 for me. It has this big warehouse feel with these skylights coming in. They have these giant walls that came off of an old train station that are just like hanging out in the middle of the store. It feels creative and inspirational and aspirational. And on top of that, I feel like the store is laid out pretty well. Again, this is kind of an odd space that they've used as best they could, but I felt like things were grouped together well and they really made the most of what they had with that space. For quality of finds, I'm rating this one as a 5 out of 5 as well. There were a couple of things that were super unique that I loved. There was a vintage gas stove for $500. There were these industrial metal light fixtures for $45 each. So many beautiful old wood doors. Again, these are things that you really can't find anywhere else. So based on the uniqueness and the beauty of these finds, I had to give it high marks. In terms of projected turnover rate, I'm giving this a 2 out of 5. I can't say for sure, but I'm guessing given the uniqueness of these finds that they're not coming in with new inventory all the time. I'm guessing that most of their stock comes from, okay, we're tearing down this old building today, and you get to like scrap it for parts essentially, and that doesn't happen every day. So I think that it may be possible that if you get your timing right, they might get a lot of new stuff at once, but I wouldn't say this place is turning over new inventory all the time. For pricing, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. Pricing is tricky for these kind of priceless finds. You know, something that's old and beautiful may be worth a lot of money to someone that's what they're looking for, but to someone else that's not looking for that, it could be totally worthless junk. So given the difficulty of pricing these types of items, I feel like it was pretty fair. Final impressions are that I would absolutely return to the store. In fact, if I were doing a renovation here in Chicago, this would be the first place that I would go. I would go and scope out what they have in terms of really unique tubs or sinks or doors and use those pieces as a starting point to design the space. Next up on the list is the brown elephant. From what I could find, there are currently 2 locations for this store. One is in Andersonville, the other is in Lakeview. However, the Lakeview location is in the process of closing and they're moving to a new store that's closer toward the lake. So I did visit the store that was closing. Everything there was 50% off. A lot of the items in the store had sold and it was kind of just generally picked over. I went over to the new location and they weren't open just yet. They're currently collecting donations to open that store. So I'm going to be judging this brand more or less just based off the Andersonville location, since that was the most complete thrifting experience I had. So the brown elephant up in Andersonville was hopping when we went. It was super busy. This space is kind of a weird multi-room vibe. They have housewares in one area, clothing in another area, and then toward the back they have more clothing and that's where the furniture is. They had a decent selection of items here. This is one of the only places where I bought something. I ended up getting this little like IKEA moppy organizer thing. I was doing a campaign for Krylon over on Instagram and I needed something to spray paint and I ended up finding this here for $5, which was a great price given that these retail on IKEA for I think $30 now. If you want to check out that project, head over to my Instagram, the Andrew Harper, to see how I gave this item a kind of vintage toolbox feel. At this store, I also purchased a piece of original art for $35. This does appear to be a hand-drawn piece of original art. Really liked the subject matter here. I thought it was really surrealist and interesting. The frame that it's in is crap, like it's actually falling apart, so I will need to reframe this. But for $35, this piece of art really spoke to me. Side note, I tried to back search this on Google Lens and couldn't find anything, so if anyone knows anything about this piece of art or this artist, drop that down in the comments, let me know. So now on to my ratings. I'm giving this a 4 out of 5 for atmosphere and organization. I really liked the vibe of the store. It feels creative. The space in the back with this kind of chipping paint looks like maybe like an old church or auditorium or something. Very cool. My only real gripe with the store is I felt like the lighting was a bit dim overall. I liked that it was atmospheric, but in the back it had these kind of bluish fluorescent lights that didn't really allow me to see the items that well and weren't all that flattering either. So I think lighting could use an upgrade here. But in general, I really liked the vibe of the store and I thought things were well laid out. For quality of items, there were a couple of items in the store that I thought were really great finds, things that were really unique. And in general, I liked that this seemed like the kind of store that would take in stuff that other thrift stores would perceive as trash. I find that often in thrift stores now, they only take items that are in perfect condition or that are super trendy. And this seems like the kind of store that you would go into where they're just gonna take a broad cross section of things and you might find something that's like really weird and kooky or something that's damaged that needs love. And I really appreciate that this store is giving a space for those kinds of items. For turnover, I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5. There were a lot of people shopping in the store. Given the price points here, which we'll talk about in a moment, I think there's probably a lot of inventory circulating through the store, especially when it comes to furniture and clothing. With their housewares section, a lot of that seemed kind of junky, so I can kind of picture that hanging around for a long time. And to my knowledge, they didn't have any kind of color discount system, although they do seem to run some sales and promotions from time to time. But yeah, this store is a little bit all over the place in terms of quality of items across the board, so I can see how the lower quality items might hang around the store for a while looking for the right buyer. And for hit rate and pricing, we're gonna kind of group these two together here. Both are 5 out of 5, and it really has to do with the pricing. The prices here I felt were really affordable across the board. And so in my mind, the hit rate was also high because there were certain items in the store that I may not have even thought about purchasing, but when the price is so low, you're kind of like, well, what the hell? We might as well get it. It's so cheap, right? And so I feel like the likelihood that someone will walk into the store and buy something is quite high because the affordability factor is there. So I would absolutely return to the store looking for unique furniture and artwork and those kind of project pieces that need some love, that may not be perfect, but that you can fix up and make your own. Moving on to Village Discount Outlet. I hit up 2 locations of the store. One was in the Wicker Park area, kind of near where I'm staying, and the other one was a little bit further up north, a little bit more off the beaten track. My experience through both stores was pretty consistent, so I'm only gonna be showing you just the first location that I went to. I think this location that I went to has a reputation for being a very, very large store, and it was, and I had high expectations, and I can't say that they were really met here. So right off the bat, I got the impression that the store was gonna focus more on clothing than on home decor and furniture, and that's totally fine. I can't knock it for that. However, I'll just go ahead and say that this was a hard store to shop for clothing, in my opinion, because of the way that it's organized. Things tend to be grouped by item type and color, but not by size. So that means that if I'm looking for like a size 30 pair of pants, I'm having to look through like 300 pairs of pants to find something that would work for me, rather than in a typical Goodwill or the Salvation Army, things are grouped by size, so I can see right away if they're gonna have something that works for me. In addition, the store felt kind of dark and dank and run down and just kind of sad, so not great vibes there for me. And then their home section was very small, not great finds, and pretty like disheveled and disorganized as a whole. I did end up making a purchase here. I bought like a 1950s children's book that I'm gonna plan to use for some of my artwork. It was $1, so the price was right. So this does prove that great finds are possible no matter where you are, but yeah, let's jump to ratings for this one. Unsurprisingly, I'm giving the store experience a 1 out of 5. I just felt like they had way too much stuff in the store. It was so crammed together. It was hard to find anything. The vibe wasn't there and the organization was not there, in my opinion. For quality of finds, I'm gonna give this a 2 out of 5. Yes, I did buy an item here that I think is pretty unique, but across the board, it was pretty much the only thing in the store that I thought was pretty special. I didn't see a lot of good brands or high quality fabrics. There were maybe some interesting furniture finds, but they were pretty run down. For turnover rate, I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 5, which I think might be an optimistic score. While I did see employees buzzing around the store taking out new inventory, I can't imagine that they can take that much more inventory when they're already so crowded. And although I did see some shoppers purchasing items, it didn't feel like they were leaving at a rate which made me think they could put new items in, if that makes sense. For a hit rate, I'm gonna give this a 2 out of 5. I would give it a 1, except that I feel like this store is so large and there is so much in the store that it's more likely that you might find something, as opposed to a smaller store that doesn't have great finds. But yeah, I don't think it's likely that you'll find something great in here. It's certainly more likely for clothing than it would be for home decor, in my opinion. But for pricing, we're giving this one a 5 out of 5. I thought their prices were really affordable to start with, and they have a color discount system in place in the store so that if you go on the right day and the right item is on sale, you could get a further discount on that. And so the question is, would I return to the store? And surprisingly, the answer is yes. I actually think this is a great store to come to if you're looking for cheap materials. If I were looking for cheap thrifted artwork to work on top of. If I were looking for magazines or books to cut up for collage work. If I were looking for denim or leather or fabrics to sew with. This would be a great place to come and take something that isn't great and make it into something great at an affordable price point. And so I can't knock it entirely. The store is worth coming back to if you have a creative mind and are willing to take some possibly crappy materials and make them really cool. I didn't realize this video was gonna be this long, and so I think we might have to take a little commercial break here. 3 locations left to talk about. Stay tuned, I'll be right back. And we're back. New day, new outfit, let's go. So next up on the list is the thrift store Unique. This one is pretty similar across the board with my experience in Village Discount Outlet. There are several locations of Unique throughout Chicago. I only went to one location in the Irving Park area. These ones seemed a bit further out in general. Apparently Unique is part of the Savers brand, which is really common throughout most of the US and Canada. We don't have that at all in the American Southeast area, so it's not familiar to me, but this is a pretty well-known chain. I honestly don't have much to say about the store, so we're just gonna jump right into ratings here. In terms of atmosphere and organization, organization, I'm giving this one a 2 out of 5. The layout and vibe of the store feels like sort of an older Goodwill type look. Clothes here are organized by size, which is a welcome change from Village Discount Outlet. However, the furniture area here was just really disheveled and like all over the place. Maybe it's unfair because I did go to the store during what I think is spring break here, so it was super crowded, like even in the middle of the week. So it could be that the staff was just unable to keep up with the rush of people coming in. But yeah, my overall impression of the look of the store was just kind of messy. For quality of finds, I'm giving this a 1 out of 5. I don't think I saw anything in the store that I felt was redeemable. Again, you know I like to keep an open mind and give things a chance, but I just felt like I saw nothing in the store that was worth a second look. The turnover rate here seems pretty moderate. Again, the store was very busy when I was there, so conceivably there's a lot of stuff leaving the store, but it did seem like a lot of the shelves and the racks had that picked over look without being super empty, which makes me think that some of those items might have been there for a while. So I really couldn't get a clear impression of the turnover rate here. Hit rate, unsurprisingly for the store, was a 1 out of 5. If there's not quality finds to begin with, there's certainly not a great number of them, so low hit rate here. And for pricing, I didn't really look too much at the pricing at the time because I wasn't really very interested in any of the items, but looking back at the footage of this store, I felt like the pricing was on the higher end. I didn't see any color discounts in the store, and I did some research after, and it appears that they have certain discounts for like their members, so it may be possible to get some deeper discounts here, but not for the average person just walking in the store off the street. I think this might be the only store that I wouldn't go back to at all. Again, I didn't really see anything there that excited me. I didn't feel like there were necessarily opportunities for super deep discounts on items that you might need as like raw materials. And if I was looking for that kind of thing, I would definitely hit up Village Discount Outlet instead because it's a much larger store and the prices are lower. Next up is the Mount Sinai resale shop. This one is super interesting. My first impressions of the store were really positive because it was just filled to the brim with tons of furniture, tons of art and accessories. The only caveat is that it might have been a little bit too full as it was actually hard to get around the store. I don't really mind a disheveled look. I like the thrill of the hunt, but here we started to border on like fire hazard level, and there were items that I had interest in, but I really physically couldn't get to them, so I would have to ask a store associate to help me, and I prefer to be able to shop by myself in the thrift store until I'm ready to make a purchase. So yeah, on atmosphere and organization here, I'm giving this a 3 out of 5. I like the kind of treasure hunt feel in the store. I felt that it was well lit with the combination of natural light from the windows and artificial light. It just had a great energy and a great vibe, but it was very difficult to get around the store and possibly unsafe, so definitely had to dock a few points there. For quality of items, I'm giving this a 5 out of 5. There were many items in the store that I felt were very unique. Antiques, interesting artwork, some really cool vintage and antique books. I'll also go ahead and point out here that if you're thrifting for books, this is one of the only thrift stores I've been to where their books were actually organized by category or genre. I didn't do a full inspection to see how well that was maintained, but it did seem like there was some sort of organization there. I personally find thrifting books to be a little bit overwhelming because you have to go through all of the options to find what you're looking for, and I don't usually want to spend the time. So having the books be sorted for you a little bit was a nice plus here. I did feel like there were a number of pieces in the store that were in decent condition, but were maybe not trendy. I hate to use that term here, but there are certain things, you know, like that are old or antique or vintage that are kind of what we're seeing in the design world now versus things that just feel kind of dated. And I felt like there were a number of pieces in the store that maybe they're really vintage, but I don't think they would connect to what a current customer is looking for right now. But still, the items that were good were really good, so we're giving that 5 out of 5 rating for quality of finds here. For turnover rate, I'm going to give this a 2 out of 5. As someone that works in a thrift store, I know how difficult it is when an item is purchased to get things on and off the floor when you don't have a clear pathway to do so, and I can't imagine the employees trying to get furniture on and off the floor given how crowded the store is. And as it is now, the store is at full capacity, so there's not really room for more things to come out. So I'm going to guess that the turnover rate here is pretty low. Hit rate here, I'm gonna go with a 5 out of 5. If money were no object, we'll get to that one in a minute, there are so many things here that I thought were really fantastic finds that I would have picked up in a heartbeat. There were a couple of pieces of artwork that were really interesting to me. Definitely some really special antiques. But just to give you kind of an idea, there was a really cool velvet sofa on its side in the middle of the store with like no price on it. And then there was a rug right at the beginning of the store that had no price on it. And then there was a rug back shoved in a corner that I couldn't even get to. So yes, the hit rate is good, but did I buy anything? No. And a lot of that comes down to pricing. For pricing, I'm giving this a 2 out of 5. Prices here were high, man. Framed antique tapestry, love it, $500. Picasso art book, $95. These cool chrome lamps that had matching shades, kind of like a chic hotel vibe, $400 a piece. And while some other stores like the Salvation Army had a couple of items priced really high, that kind of felt like the norm in this store, which I don't necessarily think those were inappropriate prices for those items, given the quality of the item and how unique they were. However, that's what I expect to pay when I go into an antique store that's very curated and put together, not a thrift store that is super disheveled where you can barely access any of the items, right? And given that this is a store that is not curated, that is not particularly shoppable, and doesn't have color discount systems in place to my knowledge, those prices felt a little crazy to me. So final impressions of Mount Sinai, I absolutely would come here again for rugs, for art, maybe antiques, maybe books, but I would not come here for a deal. I'd be prepared to spend some money. And final store on my list is Goodwill. I know everyone has been wondering, when are you going to talk about Goodwill? Goodwill doesn't appear to be as much of a thing here in Chicago, given that there was only one location within the Chicago metro area. This location was very centrally located in the West Loop area, and the store appeared to be very new. I'm gonna have a hard time rating this one in comparison to the others because we are looking at this through the angle of home decor and furniture and building materials, not clothing. This Goodwill location had a fantastic selection of clothing with a lot of recognizable like mid-level brands and then a couple of like higher end brands that were back behind the register. It's a kind of a questionable choice in my opinion. I know that everyone's really concerned about theft these days, but on the day that I went, it was really crowded, and so even if I wanted to shop those higher end items, I would have to like wait in line, have a store attendant help me, and have everyone else be waiting on me. So that didn't really work on the day that I went. But I definitely saw a number of clothing items in this store that I liked, and I bought a basic striped J. Crew shirt for $7, the one that I was wearing before. However, we are not judging based on clothing here, and their home decor selection was really sad. There was no furniture to speak of. They had a couple of lamps and some general home decor items, but I just got the sense that this was not really what the store was prioritizing, and so I have to rate accordingly. So let's jump to ratings. I'm giving this a 4 out of 5 on atmosphere and organization. I really liked being in the store. It had a great energy, but I felt like the placement of the higher end items behind the register was questionable. A lot of the thrift stores did this actually, so I can't really knock it for that. However, I did feel like the placement of the registers and the line somehow felt like it wasn't very well thought out for a busy day like the day that I was there. It made certain areas of merchandise really inaccessible and just felt a little bit chaotic. Quality of items, 1 out of 5. I didn't see any good home decor items here, so gotta give it a 1. Turnover rate, I'm giving this a 2 out of 5. I'm sure that their clothing turnover rate is really high, but for their home decor here, I can't imagine this is a store that customers that are looking for home decor are coming to, and I can't imagine that they're getting a lot of home decor donations given that this is not something they're really prioritizing in the store, so it's doubtful that I would see that area turning over very often. Hit rate, we're giving this a 1 out of 5. Not a lot of quality items and likely a low turnover rate, so it's not likely that you'll find something great here on an average day. And finally for pricing, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. Based on the prices that I saw, I felt the pricing was pretty fair, and they had a color discount system in place to correct any overinflated pricing, so this one felt pretty solid. Would I return to the store? For furniture and home decor, definitely not, but for clothing, absolutely. This was one of the few stores that I actually thought had a good clothing selection. So let's chat about clothing for a second here. One of the reasons that I decided not to focus much on clothing in this video is that I tend to find that in major metropolitan cities, my experience in Chicago the last time I was here and also when I lived in New York, that so many of the good finds end up at resale shops. These are places where you can go and sell your clothes and get some money back for them if there's something that's kind of a current style. And so it seems like a lot of people will go to those places first to try to sell their clothes before they end up dropping off at a Goodwill or Salvation Army or any other thrift store. And so in general, I don't really expect much of clothing from thrift stores in areas where resale stores like that are present. The two exceptions for me in this case were the Salvation Army and Goodwill. I felt like those stores were both really well laid out for clothing and had some good finds that I thought were really current and desirable. Mount Sinai and Brown Elephant both had dedicated areas for like higher end vintage kind of clothes. That's not something that I'm always looking for myself, as I don't have a lot of interest in like high-end designer brands necessarily. And also I didn't really see anything in those areas that I found terribly impressive, but they might be worth checking out depending on what you're looking for. My recommendations for secondhand clothing based on my experience here would be Crossroads Trading. They have a couple different locations here and had some good stuff. Buffalo Exchange, I ran in here a couple of times because it was close to where I was staying, but I didn't find it as impressive as Crossroads as a whole. Second Street Vintage also had a couple new locations here that tended to have more high-end designer brands, but stuff that was kind of cool and trendy and made it worth being designer, if that makes sense, not just about the label. And then finally, there were a couple different Army Navy surplus places. I didn't buy anything there, but they were super fun to go into and might have some cool vintage finds depending on what you're looking for. I'm gonna link all the stores that I like down in the description box below, so if you're looking for resale clothing in Chicago, you have those options. All right, I've added up the scores and now I'm ready to give you my rankings from best to worst of all the furniture and home decor thrift stores in Chicago. The ones that I visited anyway. Number 1, with a score of 24 out of 25 is the REISSUED. I liked the vibe and the energy of this store. I saw a lot of great items there. I liked the way they were organized. Only thing to keep us from a perfect score here was pricing, which was a little bit on the high side. Number 2, with a score of 22 out of 25, is the Brown Elephant. It was a fun store experience. Not everything was in great condition, but if you're looking for a project and a more affordable price point, this could be a great place to start. Coming in at number 3 with a score of 20 out of 25 is the Salvation Army. This store was well laid out and a lot of their inventory was in great condition. However, I felt like their pricing was on the high side. Number 4 is Rebuilding Exchange. This one got high marks for me as a store experience. It's somewhere that I just would recommend people to go to just to see it. It's a great spot for unique building materials. Less so for furniture and home decor as a whole, but I like this store, what can I say? It really had that reissued spirit. Coming in at number 5 is the Mount Sinai Resale Shop. This one would have rated a lot higher if it were a little bit more organized and less chaotic, and if the prices weren't so crazy high. But if you go into the store prepared to spend a lot of money, this could be a great place to find some really standout pieces. Number 6 with a score of 13 out of 25 is Village Discount Outlet. I didn't love this store as a whole, but it would be a great place to go if you're looking for cheap project materials, Halloween costumes, costumes for a stage production. It's affordable and it's a large store, so there's a lot of inventory. Coming in at number 7 with the score of 12 out of 25 is Goodwill. I generally really like Goodwill, and I did like this store for clothing, but there just is minimal home decor in this store, and so I wouldn't bother with it if that's what you're looking for. And finally, my least favorite thrift store with a score of 10 out of 25 is Unique. I didn't see anything great here. I felt the prices were high. I didn't like the atmosphere of the store, so it wasn't a winner for me this time. If you visited Unique or any of the stores that I rated on the lower end and you found any amazing home decor pieces there in the past, or if you have a totally different experience of the store, be sure to leave that down in the comments below. Again, these are just my impressions of the store based on going one time, but it may be very different depending on the season, depending on what items they happen to have in the store at that time. So I definitely want you to share your experience with these stores down in the comments. Before we go, I have a couple final thoughts and honorable mentions here. First of all, keep in mind Facebook Marketplace as a thrifting tool. Of course, I do this home in Atlanta as well, but here in Chicago, I did change my location and just kind of keep an eye on what was happening in terms of the finds on there. And I thought there were some really great pieces at affordable prices, so be sure to check that out. Also, one of my subscribers recommended to me Richard's Fabulous Finds, which is a men's vintage clothing store. Lots of men's vintage suits and suspenders and ties and socks, just anything you can think of in terms of men's vintage fashion, it's there. And in addition, there is some home decor and accessories as well, just fitting into that kind of like classic menswear vintage look. I picked up a couple of like 1960s yearbook photos here that I'm gonna use for some art, so it's just a fun place to dip into if you're in that area. And then finally, I just had to mention this store up in Andersonville called Cowboys and Astronauts. This is not a thrift space at all. It is a full-on expensive retail space, but we just had such a good time here going through and looking for inspiration. There was a really cool balance in the curation between these really natural elements and these kind of like science fiction-y type elements, and of course a bit of a retro vintage energy. And so if you're in the Andersonville area and you're looking for some inspiration, definitely go check that place out. Alright everybody, this was a long one. Thanks so much for sticking with me to the end. If you like this video, be sure to like this video. If you want to see more thrifting and DIY repurposing projects from me, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.